go away and come back here in a second. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 15 here in just a moment. We're in this series of studies that I simply call worship scenes, right? We're just going to walk through the Bible. We're not going to look at every time there's worship within the Bible, but we are going to look at several examples, both Old and New Testament. We're in the Old Testament part of this discussion in our studies right now. We're talking about these just various ways that people worship God, and we're trying to learn something from them, right? We said at the outset of our study that when we're in this Old Testament section, we have to be cautious, right? Because their worship is far different than our worship. Jesus institutes a new covenant and a different approach towards how it is we get to God. If you remember, in our Hebrews study, they got close to God through what group of people? The priests, right? In particular, which one? The high Aaron originally, but then ultimately the high priest, right, who was allowed to go into the most holy of places and bring that annual sacrifice. But Jesus becomes the high priest in our new system, right, under this new covenant. And so things have changed, and worship changed when we come into the New Testament. We'll see that when we actually get into that aspect of the study. But there are valuable lessons that can be learned by just watching and seeing why, when, how. What did people do to worship God? That's been our effort. We talked about what they did in the days of the patriarchs. We talked about the examples of Cain and Abel. We talked about the example of Noah. And last Wednesday, we talked about the example of Abraham and Isaac in Genesis chapter 22. And this morning, we turn our attention into this moment of worship that happens with Moses and the people of God. And we'll get into the details of that in just a moment. But before I go further in our study today, if you would, let's bow our heads together and we'll share in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you. You bless us again beyond measure. We love you. We give you all the praise, honor, and glory that is rightfully yours. We know that you care for us in ways that we often don't even recognize, and we just want to give you the proper due as it relates to that. Thank you for guiding us through your word. Thank you for opportunities like this that we can come together, share thoughts with one another, learn from one another as we open the pages of your word and appreciate the testimony of the Bible. Strengthen us in our efforts today. Help us to have an open mind to the thoughts that are presented in the text and to learn a little bit from Moses and others this morning. Thank you so much for this day, and we pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. Okay, so in Exodus chapter 15, and remember this, the questions you're getting in the lesson sheets are vague on purpose because I'm wanting you to think, right? I'm wanting you to look at that text and grasp certain things from it in some senses on your own without me kind of leading you where my mind went. I'm trying to help get you to think a little bit about these various narratives. And one of the things we kind of got to do in order to understand the situations that we're looking at is we got to kind of know who it is, when it happened, and that'll help guide us into the whys and the hows and the more details that we have. So in this text in Exodus 15, who's worshiping? Now, I've already given you a hint, by the way, okay, it's Moses. Who else, by the way? Okay, the Israelites, and who else? At the end, Miriam, and who else? And the women, right? So there are 4 different entities in Exodus chapter 15 that are worshiping God. It begins with Moses. It leads to the entirety of the Israelite nation. It then moves on in the later part of the text to Miriam very specifically. Who's she, by the way? Not to insult your intelligence. That's Moses' sister, right? That's Moses' sister. And then the women that are with her get involved in this moment of worship that is happening before God. When does it occur? Okay, so they've just come across the Red Sea. In what manner did they cross the Red Sea? A bunch of cruise ships from, Carnival Cruise, or how'd they do that? Right, that's the parting of the Red Sea, right? They part the Red Sea. Well, they don't. Who does? God does, right? Gives some instructions to Moses, but God parts the Red Sea. One of the most amazing aspects of that scene has always been the description of the fact that he parts the Red Sea and they walk across on what? On dry land. Isn't it amazing, right? You go back in that narrative in Exodus 14, you just see that scene happening, and I've always been thoughtful, right? I've seen some creek beds, right, and things like that where maybe the water's not running across it in the moment, but generally they're muddy, right? And they're wet and they're muddy, but when God parted the water, He didn't just part the water to create a pathway for them to travel through. He parted in such a way that they could walk across the bottom of that body of water on dry ground. That's the power of God that they had just witnessed. What happens at the end of that scene? Okay, so the Egyptians, they're in pursuit, and if you're an Israelite, you're concerned, right? Because you've got two obstacles. You've got a body of water in front of you that in your mind you've got no way to, you can't cross it. How am I going to get across that? And then behind me I've got the Egyptian army. Pharaoh had a change of heart after a little bit of time, after he initially lets them go after the death of the firstborn, that 10th plague. And he changes heart, begins to pursue, and the Israelites feel stuck. You've brought us out here to die, Moses. Great. Here, we got a sea in front, body of water. We can't cross it. Army of Pharaoh's coming down. You should have left us where we were. All those issues. God finds a way, right? He doesn't only allow them to cross it, but He uses the same place and the same scene that led them to safety. When He releases the water, it swallows up the Egyptian army, and he protects His people and creates this separation between them and Pharaoh, answers the problem, and that is what leads to this moment of worship. That's why it's important. It was fitting. How would you describe that kind of worship? Okay, Thanksgiving. Well, and let me not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's start looking at the text. We've got the who's, we got the preceding things. Let's start looking now at the things that Moses sang and what he led the people to think about. Verse 1, Exodus chapter 15. So then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for He hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath He thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and He has become my salvation. He is my God. Now that's interesting, by the way. Now, go back with me again for a moment here and think about Moses' conversations with God when God tells him he's going to go lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And one of the things Moses was concerned about, if you remember, was when he says to God, well, when I get there, who am I going to tell them sent me? And what God say to him? You tell them what? The I am, right? You tell them the I am sent you to lead them out of Egyptian bondage. And initially, they struggle with that, right? They've for a long time been slaves to Egypt. And in most senses, they had become Egyptians, right? They're culturally, religiously, everything that they knew was Egyptian. But when they see the power of the I am in the parting of the Red Sea, which they'd already witnessed in the 10 plagues, right? Don't forget that the 10 plagues serve two purposes. They serve the purposes of getting Pharaoh to change his heart, right, to do what God's asked of him, but they also, in the meantime, are evidencing to those Israelites that the I am that Moses said came to lead them out of bondage is legitimate. And they'd seen 10 plagues of magnitudes they hadn't witnessed before to evidence that for them. So now we've seen this parting of the Red Sea, and it's almost like all the light bulbs go off now, right? All that understanding of who they should appreciate about God, it's finally coming to their minds, and they just want to sing it, right? They just want to praise God for it all. And Moses has penned this song. Alan, in his sermon was that last week? I lose track of time sometimes. But last Sunday morning, you remember he talked about Psalm 118, and he talked about, we forget that there are lots that wrote psalms, and Moses is one of them. And here's this song of Moses as the Israelites join him. And initially, it's praise, right? The Lord is my strength. The Lord is the place of salvation. And He aids and assists us. And notice what also, the Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. He is my God. I will prepare him. Interesting, right? And I will prepare him an habitation, my Father's God. Right? The mindset is we've got to get back to who we were intended to be, from whom? Abraham, right? Abraham, right? That's the originator here. He's the seed promise. And so from the times of Abraham, we've got to get back to thinking that way about God. And we've got to be a habitation for him. We're well before what structure? Yeah, the tabernacle. And we're even well before the temple, right? And so they're not necessarily, they haven't even got the structure, right? We're leading to those moments. But they needed to be a habitation for God. Does that sound familiar, by the way? Yeah. And we actually sing about habitations, right? There is a habitation built by the living God, right? We sing those kinds of words. And sometimes we sing that song in sight of heaven, but we are the habitation of God, right? And we should bring forth worship, acknowledging that. Just notice the kinds of phrases they use. He's the God of my father. We'll exalt him. Here's an interesting description. A lot of people, the Lord is a what? The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name.
They're acknowledging not just who God is that they're relearning, but that he's the one doing these things.
Yeah.
He's the man of war. They're not doing it.
Right. And we've had some of those conversations in our study already, right? That God is the object of the worship. And as you recognize God as the object of the worship and not the people sitting in the pews, your focus becomes different. And your focus is about the Lord who has the power, the Lord who has the abilities, the Lord who has provided the refuge, the strength, the salvation, the rescue. The Israelites were powerless against the Egyptian army by themselves. And yet with God they had success. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. Even the best of Pharaoh's army. That's the messaging, right? Even the best of Pharaoh's army isn't enough to address the power of our God. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. Thy right hand, O Lord, has become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. It's interesting imagery, right? And we'll talk about it in a minute. Go ahead, Mike.
I was thinking that Pharaoh, why would he cross the ocean after the Israelites unless he thought he was equal to God?
Yeah, it is interesting to think about how, I don't want to say it, you almost want to say an act of courage, but it's not really courage. It's more ignorance of what's really taking place that leads him to think that he can cross that body of water in the same fashion that they did. But it is interesting, right? That he thought, yeah, I'll just pursue him right through that.
Lord.
Yeah.
So when you're full of hatred, you're not thinking. You even see it today when people are full of hatred and they're not thinking of a consequence.
Yeah.
They're only thinking of the goal that they're after.
Sure. But it's interesting to tie that back for a minute. I mean, this act of worship is celebrating the victory, right? Their worship is a celebration of how God was victorious over there, and in essence, because they're his people, him, the enemies that he had. The imagery is, when you worship, God can overcome the enemies of good.
God can do what man can't do.
Yeah. And so parallel that for a minute. Who's our enemy? Right? Satan's the one that leads to temptation. Satan's the one that brings destructive paths. Satan's the one that introduces all the challenges. But God can reign victorious. And he did it through whom? Jesus. Right? Just get your mind thinking sometimes about the parallels between these moments. Go ahead, Lord.
This song that they sang reminded me of the song that Mary had sang. That down in verse 15, I think it was, or not 15, but 52, he has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted the lowly.
Yeah. And you can do that, right? And lots of references to this imagery of Moses here in various texts. In thy greatness of thine excellency, verse 7, thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou sentest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble. And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue. There's that mindset we were talking about a minute ago, Mike. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. They didn't even think, it wasn't just that they could pursue. They thought they would be victorious and take everything back that the Israelites had taken. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind. The sea covered them. They sank as lead in the mighty waters. And when I think about that narrative, it's interesting because it gives us a glimpse of what we often have in our hymn books, where there's, for lack of a better word, a poetic way of describing. I'm sure there's more sophisticated ways of talking about that, but neither you nor I are really sophisticated. So, well, I could speak on your behalf, but anyway. But there's this way of description that allows some pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know of any of our songs that talk about the nostrils of God blasting. Right? We don't generally do that. But I found it interesting that they did. When they're worshiping God in this song, they're not just talking about, for lack of a better word here, the softer side of Jehovah. They're talking about the mighty hand of God that could take this mighty army of the Egyptians and destroy them. In this, anyway, it's curious.
That's the side of God that they were experiencing. We're kind of on the other side of that. We don't, because it's not necessary. We don't. We're not going to physical wars with people for the sake of God in the same context, in the same way. See, those were His chosen people who was protecting them. Whereas our relationship with God is just entirely spiritual, essentially.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think so appreciate that, Isaac, because that's why you'll see the transitional mindset of worship from Old Testament to New Testament. They're worshiping moments and scenes of Him protecting a physical ancestry that He needed to get to Jesus, right? So He's protecting a physical ancestry of people in order to ultimately arrive at Jesus. Once you get to Jesus, there isn't a physical nation anymore to protect. There isn't a body of people to have to protect anymore. All nations flow to Jesus, and our battles aren't flesh and blood. Our battles are principalities and powers, right? They're mindsets and ideas, and that's the challenges we have to overcome. So you do see a transition as it relates to that. I love the description in verse 11. Who's like you? Who is like unto thee? O Lord among the gods, who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Thou stretchest out thy right hand, the earth swallowed them up. Thou in thy mercy hast led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling shall hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Interesting. So this song has transitioned, hasn't it? The first part of the song was about how God had protected them from Egypt and Pharaoh. Now the song has turned its attention to where? Where they're going. Yeah. Where they're heading back to. The habitation, their promised land, right? The habitation that God intended for them. So their attentions have changed. It's interesting. 1 minute they're singing the praises of God, how He has accomplished and used His power to overcome the Egyptian armies. But that now has built confidence in them that God can do what? Yeah, and He can do the same thing when we get, right? I can imagine, it's hard to put yourself in their shoes, right? But just put yourself in their moment, if you will, for a second. Okay, so I've left Egypt. It hasn't been great, right? It's not been easy. We came to this barrier. We weren't so sure we were even going to survive this scene. God does a tremendous miracle by parting this sea and allowing us to go across on dry ground. Then He uses that same body of water that He walled up for us to destroy the Egyptian army as they're in pursuit. Now all of a sudden I'm realizing, how am I going to overcome Moab? How am I going to overcome the Canaanites? How am I going to overcome those who had taken possession of God's promised land? We're going to do it with that God, right? We're going to do it with the I Am. We're going to do it with the power that He just demonstrated to us. And so their celebratory song here isn't just about what God had just done, but it's also about the fact that it has now led them to faith and confidence of what He will do when they ultimately go and possess the promised land. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm they shall be as still as a stone, till thy people pass over. O Lord, till the people pass over, which thou hast purchased. You wonder sometimes as they be singing this, you can't help but wonder. It's hard, right? Because translation tries to give us definition and change, but you can't always know how the flow might have gone from the call and response technique probably they're using in relationship to this, or a chant type thing. But anyway, you try to get your mind, and when I see a repeated phrase, to me you can almost feel this crescendo of the voices of the people as they would repeat a phrase. And remember, they're singing this, okay, in their form, but they're singing not in 4-part harmony, right? They're not reading shape notes while they're doing this, right? But they're singing it with all their might. They're singing it, these words before the Lord. Thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, Lord, which thy hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. For the horse of Pharaoh went in with his chariots and with his horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought again the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand. And it's a percussive instrument, probably a lot like a tambourine, we would probably say. But she takes a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. So there's this celebratory type of worship. Now, right? We always we always shrink, right? When we see that kind of thing, we're like, oh, wait a minute here, wait a minute. And you've heard me say 3 or 4 times in our study already, worship transitioned and changed in New Testament times. It changed. But there's something to be learned here. There is depth of thought in the words of the song. There's realization of who God is in the song, what He's done, the power He's had. And there's emotion. There's emotion when they brought this worship to God. There's excited emotion that has led them now to come out with their tambourines, and you can, and here they go. And I don't see any parallel example of that in the New Testament. Fair enough, right? But I'm not talking about the specifics of what they're doing. I'm trying to get us to see why. Why are they coming out with their timbrels and this excited dance and this praise to God? And because they get it, right? They get it. It means something to them. Go ahead, Amy.
Absolutely no way to be a witness to this and not get moved as well.
Yeah. And note, Miriam answers. So they come out, and Miriam answered, "Sing ye to the Lord." Right? The song hasn't stopped. Sing ye to the Lord, for He hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath He thrown into the sea. And so you got Moses and the people, and then here comes Miriam the prophetess. Now the women have come, and you could just hear this percussive rhythm happening, and this worship as they celebrate what God had just done.
You know, you talk about the witnessing of what God did and the singing and chanting back. You got to remember that when the Israelites left Egypt, there was almost 1 million of them. In 430 years, they went from 70 of the house of Jacob to almost 1 million people. So it was a pretty loud noise they were making.
Yeah, and you're right. We get the wrong imagery sometimes. I've seen all kinds of estimates, right, in relationship to, but even if you took, you got children, and you've got older people, and you've got all this entourage, and you're right. This isn't a couple thousand folks or a couple hundred. This is a large city of people that are traveling together. So you're right. It would have been, the noise of it would have been astounding. I've been in a few assemblies with nearly 1,000 folks singing, and I know what that sounds like, and I can't imagine what this must have sounded like. Other thoughts? Go ahead.
There was no holding back. Sometimes when we sing in our worship, we try not to make much noise about it.
Yeah, and you're right. There was no reservation about them, and in my study and doing this again with this study of Syria, yes, there are specific hows of how we worship that are different from the Old Testament and New Testament, but I don't know of any point where God said or changed the motivations and the emotion and the move. I should be moved to worship God, right? They're moved by the scene that they've just experienced and what they're moved by it, and they begin to worship. It's going to be a little, I don't want to say blunt, but real open. We don't get that. We don't get that very much. We have been and rightfully, don't misunderstand, don't overthink here what I'm saying, but we've been so cautious about decency and order, which is kind of really a misunderstanding of what's really happening in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. I don't have time to deal with that now. I'll deal with it later. but I think there is. So let's go to that last question of this each set that I give you. So what can we learn from this scene? What do we learn from it? Okay. Yeah, all of us, right? This isn't just. I can't imagine them. You think about some of the words that they're singing. Just throw verse 16 out. Can you hear it? Fear and dread, and right? Can you imagine them singing it that way? I can't. I can't imagine them singing about the fear and dread shall fall upon them by thy greatness of their arm. There is going to be a noise, a vibrancy because of the message of the worship. And I think we should learn from that. We're not talking about handing out tambourines when you come in the building, right? Just let me be straight with you on that so you don't misunderstand me at all here. I'll be very clear. I'm not talking about passing out, right? I'm not talking about, well, I almost pointed to somebody, running up and down the aisles, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But a little expression that I mean what I'm singing, I mean what I'm praying, I mean this worship means something to me, and that it would be evident, right? And this is a song, so I'll stay in that line of thinking. But I mean, praise Him, tell of His right? Right? Is it really? Right? I'm just, think about that. Now, I gotta be careful. I always forget about that silly camera. I can't talk to people sometimes, but because it'll go out and somebody will hear me say it, so I gotta be. There's a guy 100 million miles away, but anyway, you could sing so fast that you can't even understand the words, right? That's a possibility. You could sing so fast that now it's just energy and emotion but you can so neither one are quality worship. If I sing so fast that I can't even know what it is that I'm expressing, I don't even know the thoughts, I don't even know the words because I can barely catch up to them, that's probably not solid worship. But if there is no expression of that fits the thought that I'm singing, maybe the thought is somber and would be a little more withdrawn. But some thoughts are celebratory and excited and need to reflect that.
It's the reflection in your voice, like when you're talking to somebody.
Sure.
You want to get your point across and something like that. You're not going to sing like
Yeah.
how you would just talk how you would just.
Yeah.
You're going to make it known.
Yeah.
Louder or whatever. How it would be.
And let me pause for a minute. So this is a song, so I'm focusing that way a little bit here when it comes to this situation with Moses. But I would argue even our prayers could reflect that. Our personal prayers could reflect that, right? When we pray to God, if we're praying of gratitude and thanksgiving, there should be a sense of connectivity to what I'm praying. If it's more serious and somber, it might take that tone. I'm just trying to encourage us that that's the kind of thing we can learn from this scene. Get away from the specifics of what they're doing and think about the why they're doing it and thinking about what's leading them to do it and what they're trying to accomplish in this worship. And they want God to really know how they feel, not just words that they're saying. And appreciate that. Go ahead, Lori.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I experienced this when we moved to Florida. The congregation there was like much bigger, and it's so different. But when somebody got baptized, we were kind of caught off guard because after they would be baptized, a congregation started clapping.
Yeah.
And we kind of were looking at each other like, what's going on? You know, just something we were not used to. And the preacher was trying to, and he had a sermon on it once. He was like, you know, and he talked about how they were being celebratory and dancing stuff. But he says, I'm not telling you that's what we should be doing. He said, but you should be feeling overjoyed for this person. And that's basically how we celebrate now, is how we clap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There'll be a moment in our study. I'll come back to that at some point. But it's a good question, and we're out of time this morning. But I will definitely come back to that, because there is something there to be talked about as it relates to that. Yeah.
Verse 11 shows the culture that they were in. Who was like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? That's the culture they came out of.
Yeah.
With the Egyptians, was they had a god for everything. And so now they're singing joy to the true and living God as a testimony to the people. There is just one God.
Yeah.
You know,
And I'll come back to that. There's a couple more thoughts I want to consider about that. So Lord willing, Wednesday night, I'll come back. We'll come back, finish this one up, and then we'll move to the next example that we're going to study.